to be back. Shine so hard. Very good place. Tonight I'm not going to read a poem, I'm going to read a vignette. I'm known for my vignettes, I call them Jilliana's vignettes. A vignette is really an episode which I write about, and the main theme really is synchronicity. I've had a lot of synchronistic events, and so this is really what I write about, and this is one of them. It's called Los Ochos, which means the eyes in Spanish, of course. And I've spent quite a lot of time in Cuba, and this is one of the true stories. Most of what I write is true, and this is what happened about 15 years ago, and I wrote this piece about 3 or 4 years ago, in fact. Los Ochos. I made a living for about 27 years as a dealer, buying, selling, trading and collecting vintage collectibles. One of my major subjects was pre-cinema, optical toys before the advent of cinema. Lenticular moving images came along later, and I recall in the 1950s seeing coronation images of the Queen moving from left to right on souvenirs, as well as moving picture postcards. One day I was at a trade fair about 15 years ago and came across free samples of a square winking eye. It was a retro 1960s design with heavy black lines of a woman's eye on bright yellow plasticky background. I grabbed about 10 and put them away for a rainy day, keeping one which I put in a small black square frame and placed in my yellow and black kitchen in Brighton, high above the kitchen door. The only person who noticed the eye against evil was our Cuban housekeeper, because the superstition existed in Cuba. I first went to Cuba on an eco tour with my friend Lisette about 15 years ago, and stayed alone 3 nights longer after she had left, a decision that would change the direction of my life. During those 3 days, I met and spent time with an interesting Cuban intellectual called Victor. Our friendship continued over the coming years with inevitable consequences. Sometime later, on another trip, I was invited to his humble abode in central Havana. He wanted to show me his home, and so I was invited for dinner. Victor knew how to make something from nothing. His father, who had been a cook for Fidel Castro for many years, had taught him. His bedroom, or so-called bedroom, was up a spiral staircase to a mezzanine floor, often created with high ceilings in Havana to create an extra floor. How I hated clambering up spirals. All there was in a vast space was a solitary double mattress on the floor, and behind it a full-length mirror. Nothing else in the room that I could see. Then I gasped. Stuck on the top of the large mirror was exactly the same winking eye that I possessed in Brighton. I asked him if I had given him the eye, but no, an American friend called Bruce had presented it to him years earlier. His was the left eye. Did I have the right one? Were we destined to be together? My excited mind was racing. Was this a sign? Years passed, but we kept in touch via email through thick and thin. I returned and rented a room. I decided I would engage Victor, also known as the Professor, to give me advanced Spanish conversation lessons. I also knew I was falling in love with this man of many talents. A few doors down the street where my room was, the actress Esther Cardozo I got an introduction to her from Jim Haynes in Paris. She had money, unusual for a Cuban, had a Panamanian passport, and moved freely in and out of the country. She had an interesting apartment and rented rooms to foreigners. One day she invited me to a theatre production she was giving at a local school which was using playback theatre techniques. I had no idea what it was, but it sounded interesting, so I went along to an out-of-way school in a suburb of Havana. The room was packed with teenagers mainly, a few adults, one being an American playback teacher, and the group of performers who would mime a story someone in the audience would stand up and tell. I noticed a man taking lots of photographs, and I was annoyed I had forgotten my camera. Esther was one of the 5 or 6 performers. I was bewitched by people standing up or sitting on a high stool with their stories, and then the performers, including Esther, spontaneously writhing, miming and moving fluidly around the area, which was using stage props, materials, cardboard or whatever came to hand. I suddenly had the urge to tell my Los Ochos story, in Spanish of course, which I managed in front of an attentive audience. Then the artists got 2 chairs and some blue flimsy material. They wrote large words on 2 pieces of cardboard, Brighton and Havana, gyrating erotically, miming the oceans between the 2 cities. They inferred we were lovers when we were not, at least not at that point in our love story. It was a short, memorable performance that will always remain with me. Esther then revealed she owned a theatre, and that weekend there would be another playback performance. I was invited and arranged to bring Victor. I recognized the same photographer and we nodded. For some reason, Victor got up and made a long speech, which I didn't understand a word of, or why he was making a public speech at all. The performers were all different from the previous ones, and I gathered that Esther was also teaching playback, and these were perhaps her students. The day after was Sunday. Victor and I decided to walk in Old Havana, off the beaten track from the Plaza des Armes and the central crowded streets. Suddenly, he remembered one of his oldest and closest friends lived nearby and wanted to see if he was at home. He disappeared into a building, leaving me standing like an idiot in an empty side street for what seemed like ages. I had no idea where he was, and I was not a happy bunny. Watching and waiting was not my idea of fun. Suddenly, I saw a man walking towards me from nowhere. All alone in the street, I was apprehensive. He seemed to be coming to talk to me. Then he walked into my personal space with an "Hola, ¿qué tal?" It was fortunately the photographer from the playback theatre who was holding an envelope in his hand. We spoke about the performance and he confessed to being Esther's lover, or one of them. He then said he had just had last night's performance photos developed. Could I see them? Yes, of course. And there, in a city of who knows how many millions, he held the photo of Victor giving his speech with my hand showing, but not my body or my face. He gave me the treasured photo and sped off. Back in Brighton, I had the matching winking eye. I was stunned at the synchronicity, first the eye, then the photo. My friendship continues to this day across the oceans of time and sound waves of cyberspace between Brighton and Havana.
Wow.